The art of dominance without confrontation has been practiced by history's most successful leaders, diplomats, and strategists for centuries. When Marcus entered the boardroom that Tuesday morning, he had no idea that the principles he was about to employ would fundamentally transform not only his career trajectory but his entire approach to human interaction. The meeting that awaited him was designed to be his professional execution. 3 senior partners had assembled to strip him of his project leadership role following a series of client complaints. Yet within 45 minutes, Marcus would walk out with expanded responsibilities, a promotion timeline, and the grudging respect of men who had intended to diminish him. This transformation didn't occur through aggressive confrontation or emotional manipulation. Instead, Marcus had unknowingly tapped into what Niccolò Machiavelli understood 5 centuries ago: true power lies not in the ability to win fights, but in the capacity to make fighting unnecessary while simultaneously positioning oneself as the inevitable victor. The Machiavellian approach to dominance operates on a fundamental principle that most people misunderstand. It's not about being ruthless or cruel, but about understanding human nature so deeply that you can navigate any social or professional situation to your advantage while others remain unaware of your strategic thinking. Part 1: The Foundation of Invisible Power. The first principle of Machiavellian dominance centers on a counterintuitive truth that separates amateurs from masters: the moment you need to fight, you have already lost. Physical confrontation, heated arguments, and emotional outbursts are the tools of those who lack the sophistication to achieve their goals through more elegant means. When Sarah found herself facing workplace harassment from a colleague who had been systematically undermining her presentations and stealing credit for her ideas, her initial instinct was to confront him directly during the next team meeting. Instead, she chose a different path that would ultimately lead to his resignation while positioning her as the natural successor to his role. Understanding the psychology of perception forms the cornerstone of this approach. Human beings make decisions based on emotion and justify them with logic, yet they consistently believe they are being rational. This gap between actual decision-making processes and perceived decision-making processes creates opportunities for those who understand how to influence the emotional undercurrents while allowing others to maintain their illusion of logical choice. Sarah began by studying her colleagues' patterns, motivations, and insecurities. She observed that he was most aggressive when he felt his competence was questioned and most cooperative when he felt respected and valued. The concept of strategic patience becomes crucial here. Unlike conventional wisdom that suggests striking while the iron is hot, the Machiavellian approach often requires allowing situations to develop naturally while positioning yourself to benefit regardless of the outcome. Sarah didn't immediately expose her colleague's theft of ideas. Instead, she began documenting everything meticulously while simultaneously making herself indispensable to projects he was leading. She volunteered for additional responsibilities, offered solutions to problems before they became critical, and gradually became the person everyone turned to for reliable execution. Information asymmetry represents another fundamental weapon in the Machiavellian arsenal. While her colleague was focused on taking credit and playing political games, Sarah was gathering intelligence about departmental priorities, upcoming projects, and leadership concerns. She attended optional training sessions, built relationships with people in other departments, and positioned herself as someone who understood the broader organizational context. When leadership began questioning project delays and quality issues, Sarah had already established herself as the person with solutions rather than excuses. The principle of controlled revelation becomes essential for maintaining dominance without appearing threatening. Rather than exposing her colleague's incompetence all at once, Sarah allowed his limitations to become apparent naturally while she provided subtle contrast through consistent excellence. During project reviews, she would ask thoughtful questions that highlighted gaps in planning without directly attacking anyone. When problems arose, she would offer solutions that implicitly demonstrated superior understanding of the issues at hand. This approach works because it leverages the fundamental human tendency toward cognitive consistency. People want to believe their perceptions are accurate and their decisions are justified. By allowing others to reach conclusions that benefit you through their own reasoning processes, you avoid triggering defensive responses while ensuring buy-in for outcomes that serve your interests. When leadership eventually decided to restructure the department, removing Sarah's colleague from his position wasn't seen as a punishment but as a logical response to demonstrated performance differences. The psychology of preemptive positioning plays a critical role in avoiding confrontation while maintaining advantage. Instead of waiting for challenges to arise and, then, responding, successful practitioners of this approach anticipate potential conflicts and structure situations to minimize their likelihood while maximizing their own strategic position. This requires developing what intelligence professionals call situational awareness, the ability to read environmental cues, understand stakeholder motivations, and predict likely developments before they occur. Consider how David approached a situation where he learned that a colleague was planning to propose a competing strategy for a major client account during an upcoming presentation. Rather than preparing counter-arguments or attempting to sabotage the competing proposal, David scheduled informal conversations with key stakeholders weeks before the presentation. During these conversations, he didn't argue against competing approaches but instead explored the client's underlying concerns, budget constraints, and success metrics. By the time the formal presentation occurred, David's proposal aligned perfectly with previously expressed concerns while his competitor's approach, though competent, failed to address the specific issues that stakeholders had already identified as priorities. The art of strategic ambiguity becomes particularly powerful when combined with precise execution. By being somewhat vague about your intentions while being absolutely clear about your capabilities, you create space for others to project their own desires onto your approach while demonstrating that you can deliver results. This technique works because people prefer to believe they are making independent choices rather than being influenced, even when the opposite is true. Emotional intelligence serves as the foundation upon which all other Machiavellian techniques are built. This doesn't mean being emotional or manipulating emotions in obvious ways, but rather understanding the emotional landscape of every interaction and adjusting your approach accordingly. When Jennifer found herself in a salary negotiation where her manager had already indicated that budget constraints made significant increases impossible, she didn't argue about fairness or make demands. Instead, she invested time in understanding what kept her manager awake at night professionally. Through careful observation and strategic questioning during routine interactions, Jennifer learned that her manager was under pressure to improve team productivity while reducing turnover. Rather than focusing on her own compensation, she presented her manager with a detailed analysis of how her expanded responsibilities had contributed to measurable improvements in both areas. She then proposed a compensation structure that tied her increases to continued performance in these specific metrics, essentially making her success beneficial to her manager's own career advancement. The principle of multiple pathways ensures that you maintain advantage regardless of how situations develop. Rather than betting everything on a single outcome, sophisticated practitioners create scenarios where various possible developments serve their interests. This approach requires thinking several moves ahead and establishing positions that remain beneficial even if circumstances change unexpectedly. When Michael learned that his company was considering either expanding his department or outsourcing its functions entirely, he didn't lobby for one outcome over another. Instead, he quietly developed expertise that would be valuable in either scenario while building relationships with both internal stakeholders and external service providers. He positioned himself as someone who understood the strategic implications of both approaches and could contribute to successful implementation regardless of which direction leadership chose. When the decision was ultimately made to outsource, Michael was offered a leadership role with the external provider at a significant increase in compensation and responsibility. The concept of manufactured necessity represents one of the most elegant applications of Machiavellian thinking. Instead of trying to convince others that they should give you what you want, you create situations where giving you what you want becomes the obvious solution to problems they already have. This approach works because it aligns your interests with theirs and makes supporting you feel like a smart decision rather than a favor. Lisa applied this principle when she wanted to transition from her current role in operations to a position in strategic planning. Rather than requesting a transfer or complaining about her current responsibilities, she began identifying operational inefficiencies that had strategic implications. She developed detailed analyses showing how operational improvements could support broader organizational goals and presented these insights during routine meetings. When leadership began discussing the need for better integration between operations and strategy, Lisa had already demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking they needed while proving her capability to bridge both domains. The importance of timing cannot be overstated in the Machiavellian approach. The same action that might trigger resistance at one moment can generate enthusiastic support at another. Understanding when to act, when to wait, and when to withdraw requires constant assessment of changing circumstances and stakeholder dynamics. This skill develops through practice and careful observation of how different approaches yield different results in various contexts. The psychological principle of reciprocity becomes a powerful tool when applied subtly and strategically. By providing value to others before you need anything from them, you create psychological debt that can be leveraged later without appearing manipulative. The key is ensuring that the value you provide is meaningful to the recipient and that your later requests feel proportionate to what you've contributed. Robert demonstrated this approach when he learned that a senior executive was struggling with data analysis for a critical presentation. Instead of offering help directly, Robert prepared a comprehensive analysis and presented it during a team meeting as background information that might be useful for various purposes. The executive incorporated Robert's insights into his presentation, which proved highly successful. Months later, when Robert needed support for a project that required cross-departmental cooperation, the same executive became his most influential advocate. The art of strategic visibility ensures that your contributions are recognized without appearing to seek attention. This requires understanding organizational communication patterns and positioning your work to naturally come to the attention of decision-makers. Rather than promoting yourself directly, you create situations where others promote you as a natural consequence of their own interests. The foundation of invisible power rests on the understanding that true dominance is achieved not through force but through making yourself indispensable while maintaining the appearance of simply being helpful. When others depend on your expertise, insights, or execution capabilities, you gain influence that extends far beyond your formal authority. This influence is sustainable because it's based on genuine value creation rather than manipulation or coercion. Part 2, The Art of Strategic Positioning. The second phase of Machiavellian dominance involves mastering the delicate art of positioning yourself advantageously within existing power structures while simultaneously creating new power structures that serve your interests. This requires understanding that every social and professional environment operates according to both formal and informal rules, and that sustainable dominance comes from influencing the informal rules while appearing to respect the formal ones. When Alexandra joined her consulting firm as a senior analyst, she quickly recognized that success depended less on individual performance and more on being selected for high-visibility projects led by influential partners. Rather than competing directly with other analysts for these opportunities, she began studying the preferences and working styles of different partners. Through careful observation of past project selections and casual conversations with administrative staff, she learned that partners typically chose team members based on specialized skills, reliability, and cultural fit rather than general competence alone. Alexandra decided to develop a reputation for exceptional expertise in regulatory compliance, an area that most analysts avoided because of its complexity and the detailed attention it required. While her peers focused on more glamorous aspects of consulting work, Alexandra immersed herself in understanding regulatory frameworks across different industries. She attended external seminars, earned relevant certifications, and began writing internal memos about regulatory developments that could affect client recommendations. The strategy of specialized excellence becomes particularly powerful when combined with strategic communication. Rather than broadcasting her expertise, Alexandra made her knowledge available through consultation with colleagues who were struggling with regulatory questions. She positioned herself as a resource rather than a competitor, which eliminated the defensive responses that often arise when someone appears to be positioning themselves for advancement. When partners needed someone with regulatory expertise for important projects, Alexandra had already demonstrated her capabilities through her assistance to team members. The concept of strategic alliance building represents a crucial element of positioning. Rather than trying to advance entirely through individual achievement, sophisticated practitioners understand how to create mutually beneficial relationships that enhance everyone's success while disproportionately advancing their own position. This requires identifying other ambitious individuals whose goals complement rather than compete with yours and finding ways to make their success dependent on your continued involvement. Thomas applied this principle when he realized that his marketing role could be significantly enhanced by developing closer relationships with the sales team. Rather than focusing solely on marketing metrics, he began analyzing how marketing initiatives translated into sales results and identifying ways to make the sales team more effective. He created detailed lead scoring systems that helped sales representatives prioritize their efforts and developed customized presentations that addressed common client objections before they arose. The key insight was that Thomas positioned himself not as someone who simply generated leads for the sales team, but as someone who multiplied their effectiveness. When sales representatives began consistently exceeding their targets using Thomas's systems and materials, they naturally became advocates for expanding his role and resources. The sales director, whose compensation was tied to team performance, began including Thomas in strategic planning discussions and advocating for his promotion to senior management. Understanding the psychology of perceived value becomes essential for strategic positioning. People assign value based on their own priorities and perspectives, not on objective measures of worth. This means that the same contribution can be perceived as either crucial or irrelevant depending on how it's presented and by whom. Successful positioning requires understanding what different stakeholders value and presenting your contributions in terms that resonate with their specific priorities. When Rachel wanted to transition from her technical role into management, she recognized that demonstrating technical competence wouldn't be sufficient. She needed to prove that she understood business priorities and could think strategically about resource allocation and team development. Rather than simply expressing interest in management, Rachel began identifying technical problems that had business implications and proposing solutions that demonstrated managerial thinking. For example, when her team was consistently missing project deadlines, Rachel didn't focus on the technical challenges causing delays. Instead, she analyzed the business impact of the delays and presented senior management with a comprehensive plan for restructuring project workflows to improve predictability and reduce risk. Her proposal included recommendations for team structure, resource allocation, and client communication protocols. When the plan proved successful, Rachel had demonstrated management capability through results rather than theory. The principle of controlled access creates artificial scarcity around your time and expertise, which increases perceived value while maintaining your ability to choose when and how to provide assistance. This doesn't mean being uncooperative, but rather being selective about commitments and ensuring that your availability feels valuable rather than unlimited. When people know that getting your help requires meeting certain criteria or timing requirements, they tend to value it more highly and use it more effectively. Marcus implemented this approach by establishing specific times when he was available for consultation and specific criteria for the types of problems he would address. Rather than being constantly interrupted by colleagues seeking assistance, he created a system where people could schedule time with him for complex technical issues but were encouraged to attempt solutions independently for routine problems. This approach not only improved his own productivity but also enhanced the perceived value of his expertise while encouraging others to develop their own problem-solving capabilities. The concept of strategic patience requires understanding that sustainable positioning often involves accepting short-term limitations in service of long-term advantages. This means sometimes supporting decisions that don't immediately benefit you if they contribute to your broader positioning objectives. The key is ensuring that your current role provides opportunities to demonstrate capabilities that will be valuable in future positions you want to achieve. When Jennifer learned that her company was planning to implement a new customer relationship management system, she volunteered to lead the evaluation process despite having no formal project management experience. The assignment was time-consuming and politically challenging because different departments had conflicting requirements and preferences. However, Jennifer recognized that successfully managing this implementation would demonstrate her ability to handle cross-functional coordination, vendor relationships, and change management, all skills that would be essential for the senior management role she ultimately wanted. The implementation process was indeed difficult, requiring Jennifer to navigate competing priorities, manage resistance to change, and ensure that the new system met diverse needs while staying within budget. However, by approaching the challenge systematically and maintaining focus on organizational rather than departmental benefits, she successfully led the project to completion. The experience not only demonstrated her management potential but also gave her detailed knowledge of company operations across multiple departments and established relationships with key stakeholders throughout the organization. The art of influence without authority becomes crucial when your formal position doesn't provide sufficient power to achieve your objectives directly. This requires understanding how to motivate people to support your initiatives when they have no obligation to do so. The most effective approach typically involves aligning your objectives with theirs and making it clear how their success depends on your success. David faced this challenge when he was assigned to lead a cross-functional team for a critical project but was given no formal authority over team members who reported to different managers. Rather than trying to establish authority through position, David focused on establishing credibility through expertise and reliability. He began each team meeting by presenting clear objectives, realistic timelines, and detailed plans for achieving project goals. More importantly, David invested time in understanding each team member's individual priorities and constraints. He learned that the representative from finance was concerned about budget overruns, the marketing representative needed deliverables that could be used for promotional purposes, and the operations representative was focused on implementation feasibility. Rather than treating these as obstacles to overcome, David incorporated these concerns into project planning and made each team member's success a component of overall project success. When challenges arose during implementation, team members were motivated to find solutions because they understood how project failure would affect their own objectives. David had positioned himself not as someone who directed their work but as someone who enabled their success. This approach proved so effective that several team members specifically requested to work with David on future projects, and senior management began assigning him to increasingly complex cross-functional initiatives. The psychology of credibility transfer represents an advanced technique for enhancing your positioning through association with established authority figures. By aligning yourself with respected leaders and contributing to their success, you can benefit from their credibility while building your own reputation. This requires genuine value creation rather than simple association. You must actually make these leaders more successful through your contributions. When Lisa wanted to transition from her current department to a more strategic role, she began researching the priorities and challenges of senior executives whose initiatives aligned with her interests. She identified a vice president who was struggling to implement a digital transformation initiative because of resistance from middle management and unclear success metrics. Rather than approaching him directly, Lisa developed a detailed analysis of implementation challenges and potential solutions, which she shared with her own manager as background information for upcoming budget discussions. Her manager found the analysis so valuable that he shared it with the vice president, who requested a meeting with Lisa to discuss her insights. During this conversation, Lisa demonstrated not only her understanding of the technical aspects of digital transformation but also her awareness of organizational dynamics and change management principles. The vice president was impressed enough to request that Lisa be assigned to his initiative on a part-time basis, which eventually led to a full-time transfer and promotion. The concept of manufactured indispensability ensures that your continued involvement becomes essential to ongoing success rather than simply helpful. This requires developing expertise or relationships that would be difficult to replace and ensuring that important initiatives depend on your continued participation. However, this must be balanced carefully to avoid creating resentment or appearing to hold projects hostage to your personal advancement. The most effective approach involves making yourself indispensable through value creation rather than gatekeeping. This means developing skills that genuinely improve outcomes and sharing knowledge in ways that make others more effective while maintaining your central role in important processes. When your departure would create genuine problems rather than simple inconvenience, your positioning becomes much stronger for future advancement opportunities. Strategic positioning ultimately requires understanding that sustainable dominance comes from making others successful in ways that enhance your own position. This creates positive-sum situations where supporting your advancement becomes aligned with others' interests rather than competitive with them. The most successful practitioners of Machiavellian positioning are those who can create these win-win scenarios consistently while ensuring that their own benefits are proportionally greater than what others receive. Part 3, the execution of subtle dominance. The final phase of Machiavellian dominance focuses on the sophisticated execution of influence in real-time situations, where theoretical understanding must be translated into practical action under pressure. This requires developing the ability to read social dynamics instantly, adjust strategies based on emerging information, and maintain long-term objectives while adapting to immediate circumstances. The mastery of subtle dominance lies not in following predetermined scripts but in understanding principles so deeply that appropriate responses emerge naturally from situational awareness. When Catherine walked into the conference room for what she knew would be a contentious negotiation with a potential partner organization, she carried with her not a detailed script but a clear understanding of leverage points, stakeholder motivations, and multiple pathways to success. The other organization had initiated the meeting after experiencing significant problems with their current supplier, and Catherine's company offered a solution that could address their immediate needs while providing long-term strategic advantages. However, the negotiation was complicated by internal politics within the potential partner organization and skepticism about changing established relationships. Rather than beginning with a presentation about her company's capabilities, Catherine opened the meeting by asking detailed questions about their current challenges and future objectives. This approach served multiple purposes. It demonstrated genuine interest in understanding their situation, it provided her with real-time intelligence about their priorities and constraints, and it positioned her as a consultant seeking to understand problems rather than a vendor seeking to sell solutions. As representatives from different departments described their frustrations and concerns, Catherine listened not only to what they said but to how they interacted with each other and where their interests aligned or conflicted. The principle of diagnostic questioning becomes crucial for gathering intelligence while building rapport. Rather than asking obvious questions about their business, Catherine focused on understanding the underlying dynamics that created their current situation. She asked about decision-making processes, success metrics, and previous experiences with organizational change. These questions revealed that the potential partner organization was paralyzed by internal disagreement about priorities and had made several failed attempts at process improvement that had left stakeholders skeptical about new initiatives. Armed with this understanding, Catherine adjusted her approach from selling a solution to facilitating alignment within their organization. She began reflecting back what she heard from different departments and asking clarifying questions that helped them articulate their concerns more clearly. When the finance representative expressed worry about cost implications and the operations representative focused on implementation complexity, Catherine didn't immediately address these concerns directly. Instead, she helped them understand how their different perspectives were actually complementary rather than competitive. The psychology of collaborative problem-solving allows you to establish leadership position without claiming authority. By helping others think through problems more effectively, you demonstrate value while building consensus around approaches that serve your interests. This technique works because people prefer to believe they are making independent decisions rather than being influenced, even when your guidance is shaping their reasoning process significantly. As the meeting progressed, Catherine began introducing information about her company's capabilities in response to specific concerns that had been raised rather than as predetermined talking points. When the operations representative mentioned difficulties with training staff on new procedures, Catherine described how her company's implementation methodology included comprehensive training programs and ongoing support. When the finance representative worried about predictable costs, Catherine explained their pricing structure and how it aligned with measurable performance improvements. The concept of strategic revelation involves sharing information at optimal moments to maximize impact while avoiding the appearance of manipulation. Rather than overwhelming stakeholders with details they haven't requested, you provide information that directly addresses concerns they have expressed in their own words. This approach makes your capabilities feel like answers to their problems rather than features you want to promote. By the end of the meeting, the potential partner organization had essentially talked themselves into recognizing that Catherine's company offered solutions to problems they had clearly articulated themselves. Catherine hadn't argued against their concerns or minimized their challenges. Instead, she had helped them think through their situation more systematically while demonstrating that her company understood their needs better than competitors who had focused on technical specifications rather than organizational dynamics. The execution of influence under pressure requires maintaining composure while processing multiple streams of information simultaneously. You must track verbal content, nonverbal signals, group dynamics, and individual motivations while continuously adjusting your approach based on emerging information. This skill develops through practice and requires genuine comfort with ambiguity and complexity. When Robert found himself in a performance review that was clearly intended to document grounds for termination, he recognized that defensive arguments would only reinforce negative perceptions that had already been formed. Instead, he chose to treat the review as a strategic planning session focused on organizational needs and his potential contributions to addressing them. Rather than disputing criticisms of his past performance, Robert acknowledged areas where results had been disappointing and, then, shifted focus to understanding what superior performance would look like in his manager's opinion. This approach served several purposes. It demonstrated accountability rather than defensiveness, it gathered intelligence about expectations and priorities, and it positioned future conversations around specific performance metrics rather than subjective evaluations. As his manager described what excellent performance would involve, Robert took detailed notes and asked clarifying questions that demonstrated his commitment to meeting these standards. He also identified areas where achieving excellent performance would require resources or support that weren't currently available. The principle of reframing conversations involves shifting discussions from topics where you are disadvantaged to topics where you can demonstrate competence and value. This doesn't mean avoiding difficult subjects but rather addressing them within contexts that allow you to show capability rather than defend shortcomings. When Robert's manager criticized his project management skills, Robert didn't argue about past projects but instead described his plans for developing these skills and requested specific training opportunities that would enable better performance. This conversation strategy transformed what was intended to be a termination discussion into a development planning session. Robert's manager found himself in the position of either supporting Robert's improvement efforts or explaining why investment in development wasn't worthwhile. Since the manager had already articulated what excellent performance would look like, rejecting Robert's development plan would essentially acknowledge that the organization wasn't committed to helping employees succeed. The art of controlled vulnerability can be strategically powerful when used appropriately. By acknowledging specific limitations while demonstrating commitment to addressing them, you can disarm criticism while positioning yourself as someone who faces challenges honestly and works systematically to overcome them. This approach works because it satisfies the human need to see accountability while creating opportunities for redemption and improvement. Robert implemented this strategy by preparing a detailed analysis of his own performance that identified specific areas for improvement along with concrete plans for addressing them. He presented this analysis before his manager raised criticisms, which demonstrated self-awareness and proactive thinking. When his manager did raise concerns, Robert was able to reference his improvement plans and request support rather than appearing defensive or unprepared. The psychology of commitment and consistency suggests that when people participate in developing plans or solutions, they become psychologically invested in their success. By involving his manager in refining his development plans, Robert created shared ownership of his improvement process. His manager's suggestions became commitments to support Robert's development rather than criticisms of his performance. The execution of subtle dominance in group settings requires understanding how to influence group dynamics while maintaining individual relationships. When Sarah found herself in a team meeting where colleagues were supporting a strategy she believed would fail, she faced the challenge of expressing disagreement without appearing uncooperative or undermining team cohesion. Direct confrontation would likely trigger defensive responses and position her as an obstacle to consensus. Instead, Sarah chose to ask questions that would help the group think through potential implementation challenges without directly criticizing their preferred approach. She began by expressing appreciation for the creative thinking that had gone into developing the strategy and then asked how they planned to address specific logistical concerns. Rather than stating that the strategy wouldn't work, she asked how they would measure success and what contingency plans they had developed for various scenarios. The technique of Socratic questioning allows you to guide group thinking without appearing to challenge group consensus. By asking thoughtful questions rather than making opposing statements, you can help others discover potential problems while maintaining your position as a constructive team member. This approach works because it engages people's reasoning faculties rather than their defensive instincts. As team members attempted to answer Sarah's questions, they began recognizing implementation challenges they hadn't previously considered. Sarah continued to ask follow-up questions that helped them think through these challenges more thoroughly. She also offered to research specific issues that had been raised and to develop alternative approaches that might address some of the concerns that had emerged during the discussion. By the end of the meeting, the team had decided to postpone implementation of their original strategy while Sarah researched alternative approaches. Rather than being seen as someone who had obstructed their plans, Sarah was viewed as someone who had helped them avoid potential problems and had volunteered to develop better solutions. When she presented her alternative strategy at the following meeting, it was received as a helpful contribution rather than a competing proposal. The principle of strategic patience in execution requires understanding when to advance your position and when to consolidate gains. Attempting to achieve too much too quickly can trigger resistance and undermine long-term objectives. Sustainable dominance requires recognizing when you have achieved sufficient advantage for the current situation and ensuring that your gains are stable before pursuing additional advancement. The execution of influence also requires understanding how to maintain plausible deniability for your strategic thinking. While you must be highly intentional about your approach, others should perceive your actions as natural responses to circumstances rather than calculated moves in a broader strategy. This requires genuine comfort with the techniques you're using and sufficient practice that they feel natural rather than forced. When Michael was selected for a leadership development program that required him to work closely with senior executives on strategic initiatives, he recognized that this opportunity could dramatically accelerate his career advancement if handled effectively. However, he also understood that appearing overly ambitious or calculated could undermine his relationships with both peers and superiors. The challenge was to demonstrate exceptional capability and leadership potential while appearing to simply do his best work in whatever assignments he was given. Michael's approach involved treating each assignment as an opportunity to solve important organizational problems rather than as a chance to showcase his abilities. When asked to analyze market opportunities for potential expansion, he didn't simply produce the requested analysis. Instead, he developed a comprehensive framework for evaluating opportunities that could be used for future decisions beyond the immediate project. He presented his work as a contribution to organizational capability rather than a demonstration of personal competence. The concept of value multiplication involves delivering outcomes that exceed expectations while establishing frameworks that can benefit the organization beyond your immediate involvement. This approach demonstrates strategic thinking and leadership potential while appearing to focus on organizational rather than personal success. When your contributions continue to provide value after projects are completed, your reputation for effectiveness becomes established through results rather than self-promotion. Michael's framework for market analysis proved so valuable that it was adopted as a standard tool for strategic planning across multiple divisions. Rather than taking credit for this success, Michael positioned it as a natural evolution of existing organizational processes that he had simply helped formalize. This approach allowed him to be recognized for his contribution while appearing humble and team-focused rather than self-promotional. The mastery of subtle dominance ultimately requires integrating all these techniques into a coherent personal style that feels authentic while serving your strategic objectives. This means understanding your own strengths and limitations well enough to choose approaches that leverage your natural abilities while addressing areas where you need additional development. The most successful practitioners are those who can adapt these principles to their own personality and situation rather than trying to implement them mechanically. The execution phase also requires developing what might be called strategic intuition, the ability to recognize patterns and opportunities quickly enough to respond effectively to changing circumstances. This skill emerges from experience and careful observation of how different approaches yield different results in various contexts. As you practice these techniques, you begin to develop an almost unconscious ability to read situations and adjust your approach accordingly. The final element of execution involves understanding how to maintain your strategic advantages while helping others achieve their own objectives. Sustainable dominance requires creating situations where your success enables others to be successful rather than competing with their goals. This approach builds long-term relationships and reputation that continue to benefit you long after specific situations have been resolved. The Machiavellian approach to avoiding fights while achieving dominance ultimately rests on understanding that true power lies not in defeating others but in making yourself indispensable to their success. When your advancement serves others' interests and your capabilities solve problems they need solved, dominance becomes a natural consequence of value creation rather than a result of political maneuvering or aggressive competition. This approach requires patience, sophisticated thinking, and genuine commitment to excellence, but it produces sustainable advantages that continue to compound over time. Those who master these techniques find that influence becomes easier rather than more difficult as their reputation and relationships develop. They discover that opportunities come to them rather than requiring aggressive pursuit, and that their success enhances rather than threatens their relationships with colleagues and superiors. This is the true art of Machiavellian dominance, achieving your objectives so skillfully that others are grateful for your success rather than resentful of it.